What's going on, Jam Fam? Welcome back to the gaming station. As you guys know by now, one of my favorite things to talk about in Brawl Stars is the balance changes. And we got a whole bunch of them announced today, so as usual, I just want to go over what the balance changes were and my thoughts on all of them. We got a handful of buffs, a handful of nerfs, and a couple of reworks, so we'll just jump right into it and start talking about all the changes. So we're just going to head right down the list, and the first change that I want to talk about is Bea. Her Honeycomb star power is getting reworked to a new star power called Honeycomb. What this is going to do is that whenever she has her super shot charged, she's going to get a 20% shield. I'm honestly a big fan of this change. I always thought that Honeycomb was kind of a cheesy star power to escape death with 1 HP. So they took that bad star power and they reworked it to cover one of her biggest weaknesses, which is her HP. And in my opinion, this isn't going to be overpowered or anything because she has so little HP to begin with. 20% really isn't going to make that big of a difference. Like on a brawler like Primo or Daryl, yeah, 20% is a ton, but on a brawler like Bea, 20% really isn't that much. And it only lasts as long as her super shot is charged, so as soon as she attacks, it's going to break her shield and her HP is going to go back to the normal amount anyway. So yeah, I'm a fan of this change. I like it a lot personally. The next brawler we're going to talk about is Karl. Now, Karl's receiving 1 rework and 1 buff. Karl's buff is going to be to his protective pirouette star power. It's getting a 5% increase to 35% damage reduction. And they're reworking his heat ejector gadget, so now it does 300 damage per second over 4 seconds. Which, for people who don't know how to multiply, that's 1200 damage. Now, my thoughts on this is that heat ejector is still going to be a very bad star power just because of the way it's designed, how people need to walk into the fire to take that damage. Yes, you can use it before you use your super and get it onto that spot that you're diving onto, but that's really only good in like Heist and Siege. It's not really viable in like Gem Grab or Brawl Ball. So the high mobility of Flying Hook is going to be more preferred in most other modes in my opinion. And as far as protective pirouette goes, I don't know if this change was really needed. In the past, this star power has actually been pretty good on Karl when they made it too strong. Like, I think he was meta back when I came back into the game in December of 2019, and I believe it was at 40% at that time, and then they nerfed it down to 20% if I'm not mistaken, and he was like very bad and like nobody used him after that. And personally, I thought they found the sweet spot where it was still a good star power, but it didn't make him overpowered. So buffing it here, I think is a little dangerous, and I think it's going to probably has a good chance of pushing him into the meta and making him one of the stronger brawlers. But we'll have to see about that. Alright, we're going to move on. The next brawler I want to talk about is Tick. So they're reworking Tick's basic attack, so now his attack mines spread further based on the distance he throws them. And they're also reworking his backup mine gadget into a new gadget called Mine Mania. And what this is going to do is that on Tick's next attack, he throws 3 extra mines. And honestly, I think this gadget's going to be broken. Tick already does a ton of damage with his 3 mines, and it already offers so much control. Then you throw 3 more mines on, so he throws 6 at a time for 1 shot. It's going to be nuts, honestly. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's going to be really strong, and Tick is already one of the more annoying brawlers to face against. Like, I get that Last Hurrah and Backup Mine kind of overlapped a little bit, so Last Hurrah was just outright better. But this seems like it offers way too much value for an offensive Tick, and it's going to be very annoying in my opinion. And as far as the attack mine spread, I don't know the details on how it's going to work, if it's going to be like the normal spread at max distance and then it just gets tighter when you're closer, or if they're actually going to change how much the mines actually spread out at max distance and then change it around from there. But regardless, if they're closer to Tick when they attack, that means it's going to be easier for him to defend himself when you get too close. And in the long run, that's going to be a buff either way, right? So I think that's going to be a little bit of annoying for aggro brawlers like BB and Mortis who want to get in Tick's face as quickly as possible. So after these changes go live, I'm pretty sure Tick's going to be the best thrower in the game, and I'm a little nervous to see what that looks like. Alright, we're going to move on from Tick now, and we're going to talk about Amber. So Amber's getting an attack nerf by 9% and a super damage buff by 6.7%. Now, Amber definitely needed this nerf. She was one of the most used brawlers over the weekend in the March monthly finals, but I don't think the normal attack damage is going to be that big of a nerf. Just because the way Amber's designed, they need to consider her entire ammo bar when they try to buff or nerf her. So if they change one projectile's damage by a couple points, it makes a huge ramification throughout the entire bar, and it makes it look like they're doing more of a nerf than they actually are. And that's basically what they did here, is that they just made a small change to one projectile damage, and then it looks like a huge change throughout the rest of her ammo bar. So overall, I think Amber's still going to be viable. It's just she's going to be more on the balance side than on the strong side. Alright, I'm going to group the next brawlers together because they kind of basically all got the same change. Edgar, Jesse, and Mr. P, they're all getting a 6% HP nerf. I'm going to say that Jesse and Mr. P definitely needed the HP nerf. They've been pretty strong and definitely in the meta, and nerfing their damage really wouldn't change anything because all of their value is based in their turrets, so HP is probably the right way to go to try to balance them out, in my opinion. However, Edgar, I don't think he deserved this nerf because he's been struggling in 3v3 modes, basically because he's all reliant on his super, so when he doesn't have his super, he has a hard time actually getting value when he's on the map. So what they did is they took a squishy, close range brawler and they nerfed his HP to try to make him better or more balanced. I don't know. I don't think it's a great change. Like, I get that he's frustrating to play against in Showdown because he can just jump in your face and you have a hard time dealing with him. But as I've said before, I don't think the game should be balanced around Showdown. I think Showdown should just be a side option to play the game for when you don't want to play with randoms. I think a better change for Edgar to make him less frustrating to play against is to nerf how far his super can jump or the time that it takes for him to land on his super or something like that. I think taking a non-tank brawler who's close range and nerfing their HP again is a bad mistake. We saw this happen with BB before too, where she doesn't have exactly like super tank health and they nerfed her down to like mid-range brawler health and she couldn't really do much. So yeah, I think Edgar is going to be pretty bad for a little while here. But we're going to move on, and the next brawler I want to talk about is Barley. His extra noxious star power is now going to give him 200 extra damage instead of like 150 or whatever it was before. It ends up being like a 42% buff, which sounds like a lot, but because we're talking about such small numbers, it really isn't in the long run. However, I am a fan of this change. I think Barley's been probably the worst thrower for a little while now. It's definitely an argument between Barley and Dynamite who's worse, but I think Barley just struggles a little bit more. I think this star power buff might help him out a little bit. I think I would have liked to see it in his normal attacks a little bit more, but I'm still okay with it being on his star power. We'll have to wait and see on this one to see the exact results, but I think it'll be okay in the long run. Alright, the next two brawlers we're going to talk about is Bea and Brock. They're both getting 7% damage buffs. Now, as far as Bea, I don't think it was needed because I think Bea's been pretty balanced for a little bit. They did just rework his super totem, which was what made him really strong in the last meta. So overall, I don't think Bea really needed any buff or nerf. We'll have to see what this does, but he might be on the stronger side just because his attacks will do like a little bit more damage. However, for Brock, I'm a big fan of this change. Like I said at the end of the Brock video I did a little while back, Brock was really bad in my opinion. He did like no damage and he had like no health and it was just hard to get a lot of value out of him in my opinion. So seeing him get his damage back is a pretty nice change. I don't think he needed like an HP buff or anything. Damage is really my big complaint about the way Brock was. So yeah, I'm a fan of the Brock change, and Bea I'm not really a fan of. We'll have to see what happens with Bea, but I think Brock will be a lot better now. Alright, the next brawler I want to talk about is Crow. Now, both of Crow's star powers are getting buffed. The debuff from his extra toxic star power is now going to reduce damage by 25%, and carrying Crow is going to do an extra 152 damage. So these sound like pretty sizable buffs, but I don't know if they're the right way to go for Crow. In my opinion, the problem with Crow is just the way he's designed. The fact that his poison doesn't stack makes it really hard for him to get kills. And now there's no excuse like they don't want to confuse people with stacking poison because now Byron's poison stacks, so I don't understand why Crow's can't. Also, Byron's does like 500 per tick and Crow's only does like 100 something per tick, so there's really no excuse honestly. So if they made Crow's damage stack, I would be a bigger fan, or if they made his daggers do more damage so he had more burst damage for when he jumped and got in people's faces, I think that would help him a lot too. So overall, I'm not a big fan of these buffs for Crow. I don't think that they're really addressing the big problem with Crow, and that's the fact that he's a poorly designed assassin. I'm just going to reiterate, I think they either need to make his damage with his daggers go up, or they need to make his poison stack to make him more viable. Alright, we're going to move on from Crow, and we're going to talk about Gale. The damage from Gale's super is getting buffed by 140%. Now, that sounds like a lot, but it's really not because we're talking about such small numbers here. Like, I think his super at max level does like 300 damage, so 140% of 300 is not a lot, honestly. And I don't think that you should be using his super to get like last finishing kills because it's honestly got more utility than just finishing off a brawler. Especially if you're running Blustery Blow and you can knock people into a wall and get a stun and pretty much guarantee a kill from that point. So yeah, honestly, I don't know what they're thinking with this buff because like I said, Gale's super actually offers more utility than damage, and I don't know why they would just try to buff the damage of it. Alright, we're going to move on from Gale. We're going to talk about Jean. Now, Jean is getting a 12% HP buff, and that's actually a lot. I guess he needed it because I don't think we saw Gene at all in the competitive sets over the weekend. And I know he's been struggling ever since they nerfed his gadget. So I think that this is probably a good direction to take him. Although I wouldn't have been opposed to a damage buff for him either, because I feel like he doesn't do that much damage, and buffing that up a little bit would have helped him. But the HP buff will really help him, especially in gem grab when he's expected to be the gem carrier. So this will make it easier for him to survive. Plus he can do like a quick heal with his knockback gadget. So yeah, like I said, 12% is a pretty big buff, and I think he needed it, so we'll have to see if this ends up helping him. But overall, I think it's okay because he was struggling in the meta anyway. Alright, and the last brawler on the list, Lou. He's getting an HP buff by 3%. They're buffing his hypothermia star power, so now the debuff caps out at 50% reload speed nerf. And now his super is going to do 40 damage per second while you're stuck in it. Quick side note, I'm not sure if that 40 damage per second, if it scales up with your level, or if it's just a static amount that's the same throughout all levels. But overall, I don't think it's going to be a super noticeable amount of damage. So my thoughts on all these buffs. The HP increase isn't really going to help him much. I think it's more of a rounding thing than anything. Like maybe he survives one extra shot from a couple extra brawlers or something like that. And like I just said, the super damage is kind of negligible. He's got a very similar situation to Gale. Like, you're still going to use it to try to control the middle of the map or whatever. You're not really going to be using it to try to get a kill or anything like that. And I think the hypothermia star power buff is pretty sizable. In my opinion, that star power, it did have its use, but it didn't seem like it was doing anything. It's one of those star powers that it's hard to see the effect of when you're not under the effect of the debuff. But a 50% reload debuff is pretty huge, especially on a brawler like Brock or Spike, who have longer reload speeds to begin with. However, I think I'm going to prefer his other star power over hypothermia, just because it offers so much more utility in his super. Like, yeah, his super is going to do damage now, but I think that being able to get freezes off just because people are stuck in your super is way more useful. I mean, I could be wrong, because this is, like I said, this is a pretty sizable buff to this hypothermia star power, but we'll have to see about that. So yeah, that was the last balance change. So overall, I think there's definitely a few good balance changes here, and there's a couple of questionable ones. And there's definitely a couple nerfs that I'm questioning didn't happen and why they didn't happen. One notable one is Sprout. I've been saying for a while that Sprout's got a lot of utility. He's a high HP thrower who can hide behind walls and stay safe, and then he also has access to a shield and has a gadget that lets him burst heal 2000 HP very quickly. And I still think that Byron deserves another nerf because he still offers a ton of utility to his team. But there's definitely some good changes. My favorite one is probably Bea's honeycoat rework. I think that's a big change, and I think it's going to help her in 3v3s and also make her less strong in Showdown. But my least favorite changes are probably Edgar's HP nerf, because it doesn't really make sense to me, and the Crow rework, because they just don't seem to understand why Crow isn't getting better. But what do you guys think about the changes? Let me know down in the comments. What was your favorite, and what was your least favorite, and what do you guys think they missed the mark on? Like, what brawler you think they should address in the near future? But anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.